So we should be on YouTube as well. All right, how's everybody doing? Hotep, hey, this is Michael Imhotep, founder of the African History Network, host of the African History Network show. I'm a talk show host, researcher, lecturer, writer, and historian. So it is Monday, March 16th, 2020, and we are live. We're trying to broadcast here. We're broadcasting through Restream, so trying to get all the technology working. So it looks like we're on live now. All right, so everybody share this broadcast on your social media pages and invite your friends to tune in. Okay, so you've heard me talk about the coronavirus. I've been studying this for a month now, going back to February. My first broadcast dealing with it was on my Sunday night show, March 1st, 2020, the African History Network show. And in my research on coronavirus, COVID-19, I kept coming across information about the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918, okay? And I wanted to do, you've heard me talk about this on my Sunday night show, the Spanish flu pandemic. It killed 675,000 people in the US. It killed about 50 million people worldwide, according to the CDC, Center for Disease Control and Prevention. But I've read a number of articles dealing with this, and I wanted to do a specific broadcast dealing with that. Okay, so that's what we're going to deal with today. So we're going to deal with the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918, killed 675,000 people in the US, and what we can learn from it. And Donald Trump in general has not learned the lesson of the Spanish flu pandemic. Washington Post has an article dealing with this because one of the main reasons why it was able to spread in the US is because the US government was not honest with the people, with the US citizens, to prepare them for the pandemic. Okay, they were not honest with the people, and it allowed it to spread. Okay, so hope you're ready for a real history lesson. How's everybody doing? Sandy and Monique on Facebook, and we're broadcasting on my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP, as well. So everybody share this broadcast, okay? And also, if you'd like this type of information, you could donate to the African History Network, $, the AHN Show through Cash App, $, the AHN Show through Cash App, and then also through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN Show, paypal.me/the AHN Show. That helps us keep doing the research, stay on the air, broadcast our Sunday night show, etc. All right. Okay, so I'm going to first, I want to do an update on what's been taking place, what's happened today with the coronavirus. All right. So we see that about 35 states have shut down K through 12 schools, including the state of Michigan has shut down K through 12 schools. We see that bars and restaurants are closing. I announced on my Sunday night show that the governor, J.B. Pritzker of Illinois, and Governor Mike DeWine of Ohio have ordered the shutting down of restaurants, bars, etc., except for carryout service. We saw Governor Gretchen Whitmer announce that today for the state of Michigan. So we see health departments in the United States on Monday, March 16th, reported the largest number of coronavirus-related deaths on any one day since the onset of the outbreak. As of Monday evening, March 16, 2020, officials have reported 18 people dead, bringing the nationwide total of people who have died from coronavirus to 85, COVID-19. Okay, according to the Washington Post tally. So far, 85 people have passed away. There's been over 4,600 reported cases. As these test kits hit the various health facilities, you're going to see the number of reported cases increase. That's not necessarily a bad thing, the number of reported cases increasing, because now you can have people self-quarantine and not contaminate other people. All right. Now, Donald Trump in a Monday news conference recommended that states with evidence of community transmission of the virus should close schools, as well as bars, restaurants, gyms, and other gathering spots. Dr. Anthony Fauci, who's an expert on this, he's a virologist, he said it is not an overreaction. He's a leading member of Donald Trump's coronavirus task force, and he said that of the recommendations released Monday. We know the Center for Disease Control has released new recommendations that came out Monday. They were announced on Sunday. And the CDC recommends canceling of all events of 50 people or more until at least early May. Okay, so you can go, we'll post this article here from NBCnews.com that talks about the new guidelines, and you can also go to cdc.gov. They have a whole section there dealing with coronavirus. So I've been there doing a lot of research, as well as the World Health Organization's website also. Okay, now I want to give you some brief updates here on what's going on, because I warned people that this was coming. People said I was overreacting. They said, oh, this is just like the flu. I said, no, this is more lethal than the flu. It's more contagious. I've been researching this going back to February. The first reported cases were reported in Wuhan, China in December of 2019. Scientists did not know what this was. December 2019. Okay, so we saw that the stock market lost 2,997 points today as well. Okay, the largest drop in history, Dow Jones Industrial Average. So U.S. markets plunged despite the Federal Reserve's emergency interest rate cut to zero. So you can't get lower than zero. So now you're restricted on what you can do to prop up the stock market. The airlines are asking for a bailout. It may be about $50 billion to bail out the airlines. Okay. You have people like Senator Mitt Romney of Utah and others. Senator Mitt Romney is saying that the U.S. government should cut a check of $1,000 to all adults. You have others who are saying that a check of $1,000 should be cut for each adult and $500 for each child to help people who are being laid off and losing their jobs, etc. Okay, so Donald Trump told governors on Monday that states should work on getting respirators and ventilators and not wait for the federal government to provide them. Trump's comment was confirmed by multiple officials briefed on the call to governors earlier today. Quote, when you look at the projections, there's every chance that we could be Italy. There's every chance that we could be Italy, the U.S. Surgeon General warned Monday. The tone from the Trump administration has been changing over the past few days to one of a very serious tone. Today's press conference was the most serious that we've heard from Trump. People are realizing that this is not a game. You had governors who over the weekend saw pictures of people at St. Patrick's Day parties, ignoring the advice of not gathering in places where you have a large number of people, not adhering to the advice of social distancing. So then they are shutting down the gatherings of people of 50, basically 50 people or more. The different governors are having different limits on it, but also shutting down the gyms, shutting down the movie theaters, restaurants and bars, except for carryout. Okay, so they're taking these steps to try to mitigate, try to spread out, try to, number one, slow down people catching the coronavirus, number one. Number two, they don't want the demand of people having to go to the hospital, having to be hospitalized, people needing ventilators, things like this, to exceed the capacity that hospitals can handle. There are only about 1 million hospital beds in this country. And one thing Dr. Anthony Fauci explained today at the press conference is that whatever chart you're looking at, when you look at this curve, whatever chart you're looking at, it's a lagging indicator. So it's about a week behind where you actually are. Okay, so the tactics that you use can't be based upon pinpointing where the chart says you are. The chart, where you actually are, is a week behind what the chart says. So when you look at the projections, there's every chance that we could be Italy, said the U.S. Surgeon General at the coronavirus task force press conference on Monday, March 16th. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention is urging a nationwide halt to gatherings of more than 50 people for the next 8 weeks. The CDC is urging a nationwide halt to gatherings of more than 50 people for the next 8 weeks. About 3,500 coronavirus cases have been reported in the U.S. Actually, it's more than that. It's actually over 4,500, 4,600 last I saw. We see that Amazon.com said it would hire 100,000 workers to keep up with increased demand as people avoid brick and mortar stores. It also said those jobs will help those who have lost their employment in the short term. The director general of the World Health Organization said at a news conference today, quote, "We have not seen an urgent enough escalation in testing, isolation, and contact tracing, which is the backbone of the response," end quote. Now, most people who have died of the coronavirus outside of China, well, so more people have died of the coronavirus outside of China than inside. And this is a sign that is worrying people of how quickly the virus has spread beyond the country of China, where it first emerged. Okay. Now, France will begin a 15-day total lockdown, limiting the freedom of movement of citizens who are allowed to leave only to see doctors, buy food, or walk to essential jobs. We saw that Italy announced a lockdown in the past few days. We see the city of San Francisco has some type of lockdown as well to slow down the spread of this virus. Okay, so you can check out the live updates from Washington Post and New York Times. We're going to New York Times, Washington Post, and NBC News. I just want to give you an update on what's going on before we jump into this history lesson, okay? Because this is an example of how history is in the headlines, and those who one of the things we do as historians is look in the past to see how do we handle with similar circumstances, so we can see, number one, the mistakes not to make today, two, to understand how can we deal with the problems of today. Okay, those who do not understand history are destined to repeat it. Those who do not understand history are destined to repeat it. And if you saw my Sunday night show, I talked about how basically all of this, if not the majority of it, was avoidable. If Donald Trump had not disassembled and National Security Advisor John Bolton in May of 2018 had not disassembled the global pandemic committee or task force dealing with National Security Council, if he had not fired Rear Admiral Timothy Zimmer, if he had not disassembled that task force, if in October 2019, if the Trump administration had not disassembled the Predict pandemic task force, which was designed to study these viruses and pandemics around the world, okay, to get ahead of the curve to make sure it doesn't explode. That operated under the George W. Bush administration and the President Barack Obama administration. All right. If Trump had not gotten rid of a lot of scientists, we would not be in this predicament today. Okay. So this is an example, once again, of how elections have consequences. I'm going to give you some, post the links to some articles here to give you some supporting documentation on what I'm talking about. And what's very interesting is that Donald Trump recently said, when he's I think he was at the Center of Disease Control, but he recently said that, he was in Atlanta at the Center for Disease Control Friday before last. And he said he didn't know so many people died of the flu. He said over the last long period of time, you have an average of 36,000 people dying a year. And he talked about how he said, I never heard of those numbers. I would have been shocked. He said, does anybody die from the flu? He said, I would have said, does anybody die from the flu? I didn't know people died from the flu. Well, his grandfather died in 1918 from the Spanish flu pandemic. Okay. So how is it he didn't know that? His grandfather, Friedrich Trump, died of the Spanish flu pandemic in 1918. Okay. So it's very interesting that Trump, who brags about how he understands science so much and the scientists are so surprised how much he knows about science, he didn't know his own grandfather died from the Spanish flu pandemic. All right. So I warned people. Let me just say this, right? And then we're going to jump into this. While people were talking about Gail, Oprah, Snoop Dogg, and Jada Pinkett Smith, I was studying coronavirus. If you notice, I ain't do no videos dealing with Gail, Oprah, Snoop, Jada. I didn't post no articles dealing with that. I was studying coronavirus. And I was warning people about this then. In 2016, all throughout 2016, I was warning people about Donald Trump. And we need to make sure he does not become president. People didn't want to listen to me. Okay, whatever. All right. So let's look at the article from history.com. History.com is the official website of the History Channel. They have a number of different articles here that I've been reading dealing with the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918. Okay, and everybody share this broadcast on your social media pages. And African-American business owners, post the name of your business here on the thread of the broadcast. Email us at customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com, customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com. We'll let you know how you can advertise with the African History Network. All right, so the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918 was the deadliest, basically the deadliest pandemic in history, based upon the number of people that it killed. It infected an estimated 500 million people worldwide. It infected an estimated 500 million people worldwide, about 1/3 of the planet's population at the time. And it killed an estimated, now according to history.com, it killed an estimated 20 million to 50 million people. But when you look at the CDC's website, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, they have information there dealing about the 1918 flu pandemic. They estimate 50 million people were killed. Some estimates are up to 100 million. It's really hard to tell because there were so many mass graves that were dug and, things like this, right? So in the U.S., we see that approximately 675,000 people died of this flu pandemic. Now, the 1918 flu was first observed in Europe, the United States, and part of Asia before swiftly spreading around the world. Okay, so it was first observed in Europe, the U.S., and parts of Asia before spreading around the world. At the time, there were no effective drugs or vaccines to treat this killer flu strain. Citizens were ordered to wear masks. Schools, theaters, and businesses were closed, and bodies piled up in makeshift morgues before the virus ended its global deadly march. All right. So just as today we see schools being shut down, we see theaters being closed, etc., people wearing masks. This is the same thing that happened in 1918. So what is the flu? Okay, what is influenza or the flu? Influenza is a virus that attacks the respiratory system. The flu virus is highly contagious. When an infected person coughs, sneezes, or talks, respiratory droplets are generated and transmitted into the air and can then be inhaled by anyone nearby. It's the same thing with COVID-19, okay? Droplets, when you cough or sneeze, project, and they could go into someone's mouth or go into their nostrils, and then the droplets have the virus in it. This is one of the main ways people can get infected. There have been studies in laboratories about how it can survive 2 or 3 days on various surfaces, but that is in a controlled environment. Okay, this is, once again, this is a new strain of coronavirus. Okay, this is a new strain of this. So scientists basically just learned about this in December 2019. Okay, so they're still learning about it. Flu outbreaks. So additionally, a person who touches something with the virus on it, the influenza virus on it, and then touches his or her mouth, eyes, or nose can become infected. It's the same thing basically with COVID-19 as well. Now, flu outbreaks happen every year and vary in severity, depending in part on what type of virus is spreading, okay? And flu viruses can rapidly mutate. Now, when we look at flu season in the United States, flu season generally runs from late fall into spring, In a typical year, more than 200,000 Americans are hospitalized for flu-related complications. And over the past 3 decades, there have been some 3,000 to 49,000 flu-related U.S. deaths annually, according to the CDC. Now, young children, people over age 65, pregnant women, and people with certain medical conditions such as asthma, diabetes, or heart disease face a higher risk of flu-related complications, including pneumonia, ear and sinus infections, and bronchitis. A flu pandemic, such as the one in 1918, occurs when especially virulent new influenza strain for which there's little or no immunity appears and spreads quickly from person to person around the globe. All right. So when we look at Spanish flu symptoms and what actually happened with this, now this is taking place during World War One. Okay, World War One is 1914 to 1918. The U.S. gets involved in World War One in 1917. So the first wave of the 1918 flu pandemic occurred in the spring of 1918. It was generally mild. The sick who experienced such typical flu symptoms as chills, fever, and fatigue usually recovered after several days, and the number of reported deaths was low. However, a second highly contagious wave of influenza appeared with a vengeance in the fall of 1918, okay, and going into basically about September. Victims died within hours or days of developing symptoms. Victims died within hours or days of developing symptoms, their skin turning blue and their lungs filling with fluid that caused them to suffocate. In just 1 year, the average life expectancy in America plummeted by 12 years, okay? In just 1 year, in 1918, the average life expectancy in America plummeted by 12 years, okay? So what caused this Spanish flu pandemic, and where did the term Spanish flu come from? So it's unknown exactly where the particular strain of influenza that caused the pandemic came from. However, the 1918 flu was first observed in Europe, America, and areas of Asia before spreading to almost every other part of the globe within a matter of months. Despite the fact that the 1918 flu was not isolated to one place, it became known around the world as the Spanish flu. And the reason why was so during 1918, Spain was a neutral country in World War One. The various countries involved in the war did not want to have a lot of stories written about it, did not want to put out a lot of information about the flu. One of the reasons why was because they didn't want the stories to depress or reduce the morale of soldiers fighting in the war. We saw this here in the U.S. At the time, Woodrow Wilson was president, and we know Woodrow Wilson was the same president who had a private screening of the movie The Birth of a Nation screened at the White House for him, okay? So despite the fact that the 1918 flu was not isolated to one place, it became known around the world as the Spanish flu, as Spain was hit hard by the disease and was not subject to wartime news blackouts that affected other European countries. Even Spain's King Alfonso XIII reportedly contracted the flu. Also, Woodrow Wilson contracted the Spanish flu as well. So one unusual aspect of the 1918 flu was that it struck down many previously healthy young people, a group normally resistant to this type of infectious illness, including a number of World War I servicemen. So usually the flu, it was especially hard on people, on children 5 years old and younger, five years old and younger. And then it was hard on the elderly, but it was hitting people between the ages of 20 to 40 and killing a lot of them as well. Okay, so in fact, one U.S. soldier died from the 1918 flu. In fact, more soldiers died from the 1918 flu than were killed in battle during World War I. More soldiers died from the 1918 flu than were killed in battle during World War I. 40% of U.S. 40% of the U.S. Navy and 36% of the U.S. Army became ill from the flu. And troops moving around the world in crowded ships and trains helped to spread the killer virus. So because they were packed in close, they couldn't practice social distancing. So this allowed the flu to spread among servicemen much faster. And then once again, this is why this past weekend, governors were seeing people at parties, St. Patrick's Day parties, things like this, and a lot of people in the bar or the club, people packed closely together. So this is why the governor said, okay, look, we have to shut down the bars, shut down the restaurants, shut down the clubs, etc. We can't, because this will allow the virus to spread much faster, and people are going to overrun the hospitals. And then we're really going to have a problem, because you're going to have elderly people who already have underlying conditions. They're going to catch it. So even if, for instance, somebody 25, 30, 35 years old, even if they don't become really ill from it, okay? And we see a number of celebrities we see African-American celebrities like Idris Elba, we see Craig Melvin, we see basketball players Rudy Gobert, Donovan Mitchell, the Utah Jazz, Christian Wood of the Detroit Pistons. They've all been diagnosed with it as well, okay? So as more celebrities, especially African-American celebrities, get it and come forward with it, we saw Tom Hanks also and his wife, it's causing people to realize, oh, okay, Black people can get it also. And it's causing people, when they canceled the NBA season, when they suspended the rest of the NBA season, I think that woke a lot of African Americans up and said, oh, this is really serious. So although the death toll attributed to the Spanish flu is often estimated at 20 million to 50 million victims worldwide, other estimates run as high as 100 million victims, or around 3% of the world's population at that time. Now, at the CDC's website, they estimate 50 million people worldwide died from this flu. Approximately 500 million people around the world were infected with it. So the exact numbers are impossible to know due to a lack of medical record keeping in many places. What is known, however, is that few locations were immune to the 1918 flu in America. Victims ranged from residents of major cities to those of remote, victims ranged from major residents of major cities to those of remote Alaskan communities. Even President Woodrow Wilson, as I said, reportedly contracted the flu in early 1919 while negotiating the Treaty of Versailles. And that's the treaty that ended World War I. So when we look at fighting the Spanish flu, when the flu hit in 1918, doctors and scientists were unsure what caused it or how to treat it. Unlike today, there were no effective vaccines or antiviral drugs that treat the flu. The first licensed flu vaccine appeared in America in the 1940s. By the following decade, in the 1950s, vaccine manufacturers could routinely produce vaccines that would help control and prevent future pandemics. So complicating matters was the fact that World War I had left parts of America with a shortage of physicians and other healthcare workers. And of the available medical personnel in the US, many came down with the flu themselves. So this is what we're hearing when we deal with the coronavirus pandemic, which the World Health Organization, one, has declared as a global pandemic. Two, we saw Donald Trump in the past few days declared, actually on Friday, March 13th, declared it a national emergency. But the healthcare professionals, the nurses, the doctors, et cetera, they're on the front line. They're vulnerable to catching this. If the number of doctors and nurses who are on duty is depleted because they're infected with this, then we're really in trouble, because you'll have a lack of people you'll have a lack of healthcare professionals who can actually attend to the sick. Okay, that's something separate than being having only a million hospital beds in this country. It's about 925,000 hospital beds plus about 97,000 ICU units. Okay, so this is why Governor Cuomo of the state of New York is calling for the Army Corps of Engineers to start building makeshift hospitals to increase the capacity of hospital beds. And Governor Cuomo and other governors have been talking about how there's been a real lack of leadership and in general lack of support coming from the White House. So once again, elections have consequences. This is what people don't understand. And in a time of crisis like this, people are realizing why it's important to have a competent president, a president who has not declared war and doesn't declare war on science, a president who will listen to the scientists, listen to the experts, and use good judgment, not call this a Democratic hoax. Okay, not go on Fox News and tell people it's all right to go to work sick with coronavirus, you'll get better. These are things Trump has done. Okay. Read the article from NBCnews.com, because everybody may not follow everything Trump says. NBCnews.com. Trump has many hunches about the coronavirus. Here's what the experts say. Trump has many hunches about the coronavirus. Here's what the experts say. Read that. That goes through and fact checks a lot of that nonsense he's been talking. And then while we're at it, also look at businessinsider.com. Look at the article from February 27th, 2020. Trump defends huge cuts to CDC's budget by saying the government can hire more doctors when we need them during the crisis. Okay. Trump defends huge cuts to CDC's budget by saying the government can hire more doctors when we need them during crisis. Okay, I'll give you, go read this, and then you see how far this goes back. So just to give you some background information, I posted an article on our fan page, the African History Network, a few days ago for May 2018. This article is from the Washington Post. We saw that Friday, March 13th, our sister Yamiche Alcindor, who's a journalist for PBS NewsHour, she asked Trump the question about him disbanding the global pandemic task force, okay, which was part of the National Security Council. If we go back just very quickly here, because all history is a current event, everything that ever happens continues to happen in some shape, form, or fashion, as Dr. John Henrik Clarke teaches us. If we look at this article from Washington Post, May 10th, 2018, May 10th, 2018, top White House official in charge of pandemic response exit abruptly. Top White House official in charge of pandemic response exits abruptly. Okay. This is from 2 years ago, May 2018. This deals with what Yamiche Alcindor was checking Trump on. The top White House official responsible for leading the U.S. response in the event of a deadly pandemic has left the administration, and the global health security team he oversaw has been disbanded under a reorganization by National Security Advisor John Bolton, Bolton. That's the same John Bolton who refused to testify during the House impeachment inquiry. And he said, if you subpoena me to testify, I'm going to sue you. It's the same John Bolton that's trying to sell a book. And then when the Senate impeachment trial took place, he said, okay, now I'll testify. Okay, is that John Bolton? Now, Donald Trump, when he was questioned by Yamiche Alcindor, he said he didn't know anything about the firing, but John Bolton works for you. So my question is, who told John Bolton to fire Rear Admiral Timothy Zimmer, okay, from the National Security Council? Who told John Bolton to fire him, and who told John Bolton to disband the global health security team? because John Bolton works for you. He was your national security advisor. You picked him. So the abrupt departure of Rear Admiral Timothy Zimmer from the National Security Council means no senior administration official is now focused solely on global health security. No senior administration official is now focused solely on global health security. This article is from May 10th, 2018, so 2 years ago. The position was never filled. He was never replaced. Rear Admiral Timothy Zimmer's departure, along with the breakup of his team, comes at a time when many experts say the country is already unprepared for the increasing risks of a pandemic or bioterrorism attack. 2 years ago, the country was unprepared. It was unprepared before this global health security team was disbanded by John Bolton. Rear Admiral Timothy Zimmer's last day was Tuesday in May of 2018. The same day a new Ebola outbreak was declared in the Congo. He is not being replaced. The same day the Rear Admiral Timothy Zimmer was let go of by John Bolton, a new Ebola outbreak took place in the Congo. Pandemic preparedness and global health security are issues that require government-wide responses, experts say. This article is from 2 years ago. They're telling us 2 years ago what was coming. This is from the Washington Post. Pandemic preparedness and global health security are issues that require government-wide responses, experts say. Trump don't want to listen to the experts. As well as the leadership of a high-ranking official within the White House who is assigned only to this role. They got rid of that high-ranking government official who was only assigned to that role. He was Rear Admiral Timothy Zimmer. He was never replaced. Quote, healthy security is very fragmented with many different agencies, said J. Stephen Morrison, Senior Vice President at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Quote, it means coordination and direction from the White House is terribly important. You think? The personnel changes in which J. Stephen Morrison and others characterize as a downgrading of global health security, are part of then National Security Council advisor John Bolton's previously announced plans to streamline the National Security Council. Who told John Bolton to do this? Who was instructing John Bolton? Because he reported directly to Donald Trump. One could ask the question, who told Donald Trump to do this? Two members of Rear Admiral Timothy Zimmer's team have been merged into a unit in charge of weapons and mass destruction. And another official's position is now part of a unit responsible for international organizations. White House Homeland Security Advisor Tom Bossert, who you've heard me talk about in my broadcast, because Tom Bossert, Monday, March 11th, I think it was March 11th, he wrote an op-ed for the Washington Post and said we're 10 days away from the hospitals getting creamed. Tom Bossert has been warning about something like this could happen. And he's warning about the hospitals being overran. He said we have to act now. That was in an op-ed that he wrote for the Washington Post. I think actually March 10th it came out. White House Homeland Security Advisor Tom Bossert, who had called for a comprehensive biodefense strategy against pandemics and biological attacks, is out completely. Tom Bossert was fired. Tom Bossert was warned. This is May 2018. He was warning against. He was warning against pandemics and biological attacks. Tom Bossert left the day after National Security Advisor John Bolton took over last month. So John Bolton took over April of 2018. He gets rid of Rear Admiral Timothy Zimmer, and he gets rid of Tom Bossert. Who told him to do that? He reports directly to Donald Trump. Who told him to do that? I'll give you read the rest of this. This is from May 2018. So when I posted this article, I said this is May 2018, and I posted some information about the article in the full article. People saying, oh, that's an old article. Why are you posting that? I'm like, you don't understand the relationship between this and what's taking place right now? This is what Yamiche Alcindor was doing. She was connecting the dots when she asked that question. And Donald Trump said that's a nasty question. No, that's an accurate question. Okay. So then lastly, I got to give you this because people are so distracted by this other superfluous nonsense, right? They don't follow this. I connect the dots. My question is, who told Donald Trump to do this? Because his meetings that he had with Vladimir Putin, some of those meetings, he confiscated the notes from like the note takers and things like this. We don't have records of what happened during the meetings, what was said during the meetings, what was committed during the meetings. Who told Trump to do this? I'm just asking the question. That's a valid question. So lastly, and then I'm going to get back to the Spanish flu pandemic, but all this is connected together. If we look at this article from foreignpolicy.com, you've heard me talk about this article. This helps connect the dots. This is from January 31st, 2020. January 31st, 2020. What's the name of this article? Trump has sabotaged America's coronavirus response. Rachel Maddow has talked about this article on the Rachel Maddow show. Nicole Wallace, former White House communications director, has talked about it on her show on MSNBC, Deadline White House. This is from January 31st, 2020. Trump has sabotaged America's coronavirus response as it improvises its way through a public health crisis. The United States has never been less prepared for a pandemic. This article from the Washington Post 2 years ago talked about how the U.S. was not prepared for a pandemic before John Bolton fired Tom Bossert, Homeland Security Director, before John Bolton fired Rear Admiral Timothy Zimmer. Okay, this which article is it here? This one right here. This article came out May 10th, 2018. This is one of the reasons why I got a subscription to the Washington Post, so I can go research this and read all these articles. Okay, so just very quickly here. And let me see here. I want to go directly to the section. Two points in here. Third paragraph. For the United States, the answers are especially worrying because the government has intentionally rendered itself incapable. In 2018, the Trump administration fired the government's entire pandemic response chain of command, including the White House management infrastructure. Okay, so and then let's see, where is that here? I want to go directly to it here. Where's that? Okay, I'm going to give you the link here to this article. I want you to read this full article. This is your homework assignment. Because if you, this is the type of research I do, okay? I saw this coming and I warned people about this. And people thought this was a game. In May 2018, Trump ordered the National Security Council's entire global health security unit shut down, calling the reassignment of Rear Admiral Timothy Zimmer and dissolution of his team, calling for reassignment of Rear Admiral Timothy Zimmer and dissolution of his team inside the agency. The month before, so that'd be April 2018, then White House National Security Advisor John Bolton pressured Timothy Zimmer's Department of Homeland Security counterpart Tom Bossert to resign along with his team. Neither the National Security Council nor Department of Homeland Security epidemic teams have been replaced. This article here is from January 31st, 2020. This is what Yamiche Alcindor was asking Trump about in the Rose Garden Friday the 13th, March 13th, 2020. And he acted like he didn't know they were fired. Oh, wait a second. A whole global pandemic team is disbanded and you don't know anything about it? Neither the National Security Council nor Department of Homeland Security epidemic teams have been replaced. The global health section of the Center for Disease Control was so drastically cut in 2018 that much of its staff was laid off, and the number of countries it was working in was reduced from 49 countries to 10 countries. They're operating those countries to study these new viruses, to get ahead of global pandemics taking place. Meanwhile, throughout 2018, the U.S. Agency for International Development and its director, Mark Green, came repeatedly under fire from the White House and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. And though Congress has so far managed to block Trump administration plans to cut the U.S. Public Health Service Commission Corps by 40%, the disease-fighting cadres have steadily eroded as retiring officers go unreplaced. There's been a hollowing out of the officials, of the scientists, things like this at the Center for Disease Control and other agencies that will protect the U.S. from a pandemic like coronavirus, COVID-19. So I have to ask the question, why? I have to ask the question, well, wait a second, why would all these scientists, why would somebody get rid of all of them? So when we look at, and I'm connecting the dots here for people, okay? Because a lot of people don't follow this, right? So the last article here, if we just look at the article from businessinsider.com, because I was studying this going back into February, all right? Donald Trump was at a press conference. This article is from February 27, 2020. There was a press conference that took place, I think that day or the day before. Donald Trump was asked about his proposed cuts to the Center for Disease Control, as well as other cuts that have been made. Donald Trump defended his budget cuts to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, a Wednesday press conference on the federal government's response to coronavirus. Donald Trump said it was easy to bolster the public health agency and cited his business approach toward running the government. Donald Trump said, quote, "I'm a business person. I don't like having thousands of people around when you don't need them. When we need them, we can get them back very quickly." What made you think you didn't need the scientists? Because one of the things they do is study viruses around the world and get ahead of the curve so something like this doesn't blow up. So what made you think you didn't need the scientists? See, the Trump administration has been declaring war on scientists for the past 3 years. Donald Trump said some of the experts targeted by the cuts, quote, had not been used for many years, end quote, and that additional federal money and new medical staffers could be obtained swiftly since, quote, we know all the good people, end quote. The remarks come amid warnings from CDC experts that the virus spread in the U.S. was inevitable. This is from February 27, 2020. They're saying the virus spread was inevitable and the experts urged Americans to prepare. You still had people on Fox News saying this was a Democratic hoax. But the Trump administration has spent the last 2 years gutting critical positions and programs that health experts say weakened the federal government's ability to manage a health crisis. So then I have to ask the question, why? Why would someone who talked about making America great again make America weak? I have to ask the question, well, what's behind this? I have my theory, but we'll save that for another day. Okay, so let's continue here. Jamie, Mona Lisa, Troy, Elma on Facebook, and then on YouTube. What's everybody doing on YouTube? We're broadcasting on Periscope. The AHN Show on Twitter and Periscope. Michael Imhotep on YouTube. We've got VC, Free Housing Project, DB Cooper, Margaret. That's not Dr. Ben Carson, Free Housing Project, is it? Tima Sean, Margaret, there's a few of the people watching us there. Also, if you like this type of information, you can donate to the African History Network, $ the AHN Show through Cash App, $ the AHN Show through Cash App, or through PayPal, paypal.me / the AHN Show, paypal.me / the AHN Show. Okay. Or at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Click on the yellow donate button. You can also set up for a recurring donation. All of my DVD lectures are available at our website. That helps us to finance a lot of this. One of my latest presentations is called 6 Principles of Political Self-Defense, Understanding How Laws and Policies Impact the Economic Conditions of African Americans. 6 Principles of Political Self-Defense, Understanding How Laws and Policies Impact the Economic Conditions of African Americans. And there are actually 2 presentations on that DVD. Okay, so let's continue. We have them also in the bundle pack as well. That's part of the Black Migration 1619 to 2019 bundle pack. Okay, so let's continue. Okay, so Spanish flu. All this is connected. This is what happens when people don't understand history and don't understand that elections have consequences. And I hear, as I've said before, I hear a whole lot of people talking about a black agenda. A black agenda is not what we wait on candidates to give us or elected officials to give us. A black agenda is what we put together and present to the candidates or the elected officials. 2, you need to have somebody competent to read your black agenda. The elected official or the candidate has to be competent enough to actually read your black agenda. All right, so we know that 40% of the U.S. Navy and 36% of the U.S. Army caught the 1918 Spanish flu. Although the death toll attributed to the Spanish flu is often estimated between 20 million to 50 million victims worldwide, other estimates, let's see here, other estimates are higher, okay? Some estimates go as high as 100 million. All right, or 3% of the world population at the time. We also know Woodrow Wilson reportedly contracted it. President Woodrow Wilson reportedly contracted it in 1919. All right, now fighting the Spanish flu. When the 1918 flu hit, doctors and scientists were unsure what caused it or how to treat it. Unlike today, there were no effective vaccines or antivirals or drugs that treat the flu. The first licensed flu vaccine appeared in America in the 1940s. By the following decade, vaccine manufacturers could routinely produce vaccines that would help control and prevent future pandemics. Complicating matters were the fact that World War I had left parts of America with a shortage of physicians and other health workers. And of the available medical personnel in the U.S., many came down with the flu themselves, okay? And we're hearing stories about nurses who were getting a coronavirus, et cetera. Now, additionally, hospitals in some areas were so overloaded with flu patients that schools, private homes, and other buildings had to be converted into makeshift hospitals, some of which were staffed by medical students. Now, officials in some communities imposed quarantines, ordered citizens to wear masks, and shut down public places, including schools, churches, and theaters. We see that a lot of churches are canceling service. Okay, we saw here in the state of Michigan today, Governor Gretchen Whitmer ordered the closing of theaters. All right, so a lot of the same things that took place in 1918 we see taking place today. Another thing was they stopped shaking hands in 1918 during the Spanish flu pandemic. Now, people were advised to avoid shaking hands and to stay indoors. Libraries put a halt on lending books, and regulations were passed banning spitting. We saw today all the Detroit public libraries announced they're going to be closed, I think, for 2 or 3 weeks. Now, according to the New York Times, during the pandemic, Boy Scouts in New York City approached people who they had seen spitting on the street and gave them cards that read, "You are in violation of the sanitary code. You are in violation of the sanitary code." So the flu took a huge toll on society. Okay. It wiped out entire families, leaving countless widows and orphans behind. Funeral parlors were overwhelmed and bodies piled up. Many people had to dig graves for their own family members. The flu also was detrimental to the U.S. economy. In the United States, businesses were forced to shut down because so many employees were sick. Basic services such as mail delivery and garbage collection were hindered due to flu-stricken workers. In some places, there were not enough farmers to harvest crops. Even state and local health departments closed for business, hampering efforts to chronicle the spread of the flu and provide the public with answers about it. So we see a lot of businesses are telling their employees to work from home, telecommute. We see that you have different city departments that are being affected by this as well. So a lot of the same things that we saw, businesses shutting down, schools shutting down, churches, etc., that we saw in 1919, we see taking place right now. So by the summer of 1919, the flu pandemic came to an end as those that were infected either died or developed immunity. Almost 90 years later, in 2008, researchers announced that they had discovered what made the 1918 flu so deadly. A group of 3 genes enabled the virus to weaken a victim's bronchial tubes and lungs and clear the way for bacterial pneumonia. Okay, a group of 3 genes enabled the virus to weaken a victim's bronchial tubes and lungs and clear the way for bacterial pneumonia. Since 1918, there have been several other influenza pandemics, although none is deadly. A flu pandemic from 1957 to 1958 killed around 2 million people worldwide, including some 70,000 in the US. And a pandemic from 1968 to 1969 killed approximately 1 million people, including about 34,000 Americans. More than 12,000 Americans died during the H1N1 or swine flu pandemic that occurred from 2009 to 2010. The modern day pandemics brought renewed interest in and attention to the Spanish flu, or forgotten pandemic, or what's also known as the forgotten pandemic, so named because its spread was overshadowed by the deadliness of World War I and covered up by news blackouts and poor record keeping. Okay, so that's from history.com. They have really good, they have a number of good articles dealing with this, different aspects of the Spanish flu pandemic that I've been reading. This is entitled Spanish Flu. It's from October 12th, 2010, but it was updated February 5th, 2020. Okay, because of the coronavirus. All right. So if we look at, so there's another article here I want to look at. Let's look at the one from the Washington Post, and I'm going to come back and we'll deal with the second wave of the Spanish flu, because the second wave was deadlier than the first wave. Okay, but I want to get to this really good article from Washington Post. Trump is ignoring the lessons of the 1918 flu pandemic that killed millions, historian says. Okay, this is from February 29th, 2020. written by Gillian Brockhale. And it talks about how the first wave of the Spanish flu pandemic in spring of 1918 was not that bad. It was a new strain of influenza hitting military camps in Europe on both sides of World War I. Soldiers were affected, but not nearly as severely as they would be later. So even so, Britain, France, Germany, and other European governments kept it a secret. Britain, France, Germany, and other European governments kept it a secret. They did not want to hand the opposition, the other side, their enemies, a potential advantage. Spain, on the other hand, was a neutral country during World War I. When the disease hit in Spain, the government and newspapers reported the flu accurately. Okay. So months later, when a bigger, deadlier wave swept across the globe, it seemed like it had started in Spain because the other countries were shutting down the newspapers from reporting about it. So this is why it was dubbed the Spanish flu. Even though the flu did not start in Spain, because Spain was, the Spanish news outlets who were reporting on it, it seemed like it started in Spain. Simply because the Spanish told the truth, the virus was dubbed the Spanish flu. Now, as fears about the coronavirus spread, at least one historian is worried that the Trump administration is failing to heed the lesson of one of the world's worst pandemics. The lesson is don't hide the truth. The lesson is don't hide the truth. Now, John Barry, who is Barry, who's author of the book, The Great Influenza, the epic story of the deadliest plague in history. He told the Washington Post, quote, they, referring to the Trump administration, are clearly trying to put the best possible gloss on things and are trying to control information. Now, when the second wave of Spanish flu hit globally, quote, there was outright censorship, end quote, in Europe, John Barry said. In the United States, they did not quite do that, but there was intense pressure not to say anything negative. Now, news about the war was carefully controlled by the Committee on Public Information, which was an independent federal agency whose architect, publicist Arthur Bullard, Bullard, once said, quote, the force of an idea lies in its inspirational value. It matters very little if it is true or false. The force of an idea lies in its inspirational value. It matters very little if it is true or false. Now, when Trump put Mike Pence, Vice President Mike Pence, in charge of coordinating the coronavirus task force, they immediately put a muzzle basically on this. Well, it's reported that they put a muzzle basically on the scientists, meaning that any interviews that the scientists were scheduling, they had to coordinate that with the task force, basically with Mike Pence, okay? Because they wanted to control early on. Now the scientists, now Dr. Anthony Fauci seems like he's able to speak more and speak more freely, but it was really controlled. It at least appeared, and this is what a lot of reporting was, it was really controlled early on. So the Committee on Public Information, CPI, released thousands of positive stories about the war effort. And newspapers often republished these stories verbatim. So when the Spanish flu spread across the United States in the fall of 1918, both the US government and the media continued the same rosy strategy to keep morale up, to keep the morale of the soldiers up. It's like Donald Trump, saying, oh, this is going to go away. Oh, by the spring or summer, this is just going to go away. And, on Sunday, March 15th, the press conference that took place, Trump started off talking about the Federal Reserve dropping the interest rate down to zero. And Trump has consistently tried to downplay the severity of this global pandemic. So that was largely until he was forced to declare a national emergency on Friday, March 13th. So when the Spanish flu spread across the United States in the fall of 1918, both the government and the media continued the same rosy strategy to keep morale up. President Woodrow Wilson released no public statements. Surgeon General Rupert Blue said, quote, "There is no cause for alarm if proper precautions are observed." Another top health official, John Berry, said, dismissed it as ordinary influenza by another name. Ordinary influenza by another name. That's like Donald Trump on Sean Hannity show on Fox News calling it corona flu. And he's saying it's basically like the flu. And then to add insult to injury, Donald Trump was in a meeting late February with the scientists and the doctors. And he asked them, why can't you use the flu vaccine to fight the coronavirus? This is from what is in early March. March 3rd, this article came out March 3rd, 2020, MSN.com. Experts baffled as Trump asked why they can't just use flu vaccines to prevent coronavirus. Because it's a different virus. It's like putting a key in a lock. Just because the key looks like another key doesn't mean it actually fits the lock and works. To read this article from MSN.com, he's sitting there. He's sitting there in the meeting. Mike Pence is next to him. He's in the meeting with the scientists, Dr. Anthony Fauci and others. And he's asking, why can't you just use the flu vaccine to fight the coronavirus? Because it's a different virus. This is the same guy who was firing the scientists, getting rid of the scientists, who said he's a business person and he doesn't like to have thousands of people around doing nothing. Okay. February 25th, 2020, businessinsider.com. Trump spent the past 2 years slashing the government agencies responsible for handling the coronavirus outbreak. This is from February 25th, 2020. This is the type of research I've been doing. Trump spent the past 2 years slashing the government agencies responsible for handling the coronavirus outbreak. So then I have to ask a question. Why is he doing that? I'm going to give you the link to this article. I want you to read this. Let's see, we have it. I have that link here. I gave you the one from foreignpolicy.com. So it's amazing how when you start reading information like this, it changes you stop focusing on all this superfluous nonsense, who said what and all this other stuff. And you start focusing on this here, because this November 3rd, 2020 election, this presidential election, I'm telling you, this is literally about life or death. This election right here, this is literally about life or death. I know a few years ago they had the vote or die campaign trying to get younger people to vote. No, this is literally about life or death right here. Okay, let's continue. All right, this is the Washington Post article dealing with, let's see, go back here. Yeah, Trump has ignored the lessons of 1918 flu pandemic that killed millions and also killed his grandfather, Friedrich Trump. Okay. All right, so President Woodrow Wilson released no public statement. Surgeon General Rupert Blue said there is no cause for alarm if proper precautions are observed. Another top official dismissed it as ordinary influenza by another name. but it was not ordinary influenza. The Spanish flu had a mortality rate of 2%, much higher than seasonal influenza strains, and similar to some early estimates about the coronavirus, because the coronavirus is at least 10 times as lethal than the flu. It's at least 10 times 10 times more lethal than the flu. And that's based upon US estimates. Now, the World Health Organization a couple weeks ago estimated it was 3.4%. It had a 3.4% mortality rate. In the US, as you go higher in age and you go 60 years or older, the mortality rate increases to about 15%. So just saying it has a 1% mortality rate is an average. But as you go higher in age, the mortality rate increases. It becomes more deadly. So it also differed, the Spanish flu also differed in who it killed. Seasonal flu tends to be worse for the very young and very old. So those like 5 years old and younger, and the very old, like 60s, 60 up, etc. The Spanish flu was deadliest in young adults, such as soldiers crowded into military camps. For the most part, the media followed the government's lead and self-censored dire news. For the most part, the US media followed the government's lead and self-censored dire news. That made everything worse, author John Berry said, because people are not getting the accurate information. And then we also see a difference in how different cities handle it. So the city of St. Louis, Missouri handled it differently than the city of Philadelphia, and it was more severe in the city of Philadelphia. There was a parade that took place in 1919, and they didn't cancel the parade. And this allowed it to spread more. It wasn't the only reason why, but it allowed it to spread more, which is, so today, we saw, like in the past few days, we saw different cities have canceled their St. Patrick's Day parades. So, because a lot of them are learning from this lesson. Now, so Trump hasn't learned this lesson, but a lot of city leaders and governors have learned this lesson. For example, in Philadelphia, local officials were planning the largest parade in the city's history. Just before the scheduled event, about 300 returning soldiers started spreading the virus in the city. Quote, and basically every doctor, they were telling reporters the parade should not happen. The reporters were writing the stories. Editors were killing the stories, John Berry said. The Philadelphia papers would not print anything about it. So this information was being suppressed. In the city of Philadelphia, this information was being suppressed. The doctors were telling reporters that the parade should not take place because you're going to spread the flu. The editors of the newspapers were killing the articles. Quote, the Philadelphia papers would not print anything about it, end quote. The parade was held, and 48 hours later, the Spanish flu slammed the city of Philadelphia. Even once schools were closed and public gatherings were banned, city officials claimed it was not a public health measure and there was no cause for alarm. Philadelphia became one of the hardest hit areas of the country. The dead lay in their beds and on the streets for days. Eventually, they were buried in mass graves. More than 12,500 residents died in Philadelphia, according to the Philadelphia Inquirer. If a newspaper reported the truth, the government threatened the newspaper. The Jefferson County Union in Wisconsin warned about the seriousness of the flu on September 27, 1918. Within days, an Army general began prosecution against the newspaper under a Wartime Sedition Act, claiming it had, quote, depressed morale, end quote. Now, There was CNN has an article dealing with the, they have an article dealing with the parade, okay? This is from March 15th, 2020, about this parade. Philadelphia did not cancel a parade during a 1918 pandemic. The results were devastating. So this is one of the reasons why the governors are shutting down the bars and the restaurants. I saw interviews with some of the Governor Gretchen Whitmer, who's governor of Michigan. She and other governors said they saw pictures of people at St. Patrick's Day parties at bars and things like this just past weekend, ignoring the advice of social distancing, and too many people packed into an area. So they said they have to shut down the bars, shut down the restaurants, things like this, because this will allow for the virus to spread quickly. So if we go back and look at this article briefly here, it says the spread of the novel coronavirus has resulted in events being postponed or canceled across the country. Everything from the NBA and concerts to universities and schools has been affected. All this could basically have been avoided. 95%, if not 100%, could have been avoided if you had somebody in office who used judgment, did not declare war on the scientists. Okay, if the National Security Advisor John Bolton had not fired Rear Admiral Timothy Zimmer, had not disbanded the global pandemic health security team, if the Trump administration did not disband the Predict project in October 2019 that studied global pandemics, these are things that operated under President Obama. Okay. These are things that operate under President Obama, and Trump is destroying all of this. So you have to sit back and ask the question, why? What's really behind this? It might be enough to make people wonder, is all this necessary with the shutting down of all this, the cancellation of National Hockey League, Major League Soccer, NCAA? The answer is yes. Just look at Philadelphia 1918 and the spread of the flu. In September 1918, Philadelphia held a planned Liberty Loan Parade, LOAN, to promote the government bonds that were being used to pay for World War I. They did the same thing during World War II. They sold government bonds, and during World War II, see, I'm an old radio show buff, so I listen to a lot of old radio shows, Dragnet and Fibber McGee and Molly, the Great Gildersleeve, Burns and Allen, Lone Ranger, things like this, right? And you go back and listen to old radio shows during World War II, you hear them on the show and the stars of the show promoting buying government bonds to help in the war effort. Okay, you can do your part. You may not be able to serve in the war, but you too can do your part. You can buy government bonds to help finance the war. They did the same thing in World War I. But the parade took place when the pandemic, commonly called the Spanish flu, the H1N1 virus, arrived in the city of 1.7 million people. The virus swept through the world between 1918 and 1919. About a third of the entire world's population, about 500 million people at the time, were infected with the virus, and about 50 million died, according to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. There was no vaccine against the virus. Though the virus infected 80% of the population in Spain, it seemed far away. It mainly spread through Europe and Asia, according to information from the University of Pennsylvania's Archives and Records Center. It did not reach the U.S. until the spring of 1918 among military personnel, the CDC says. As U.S. troops came home from World War I, cases popped up in cities like Boston, Massachusetts. The virus spread in Philadelphia on September 9th, 1918, through the Philadelphia Navy Yard, University of Pennsylvania states. In a matter of days, 600 sailors had the virus. Yet Philadelphia did not cancel its Liberty long parade scheduled for just a little more than a week later. The parade was meant to be a patriotic wartime effort. The parade went on as scheduled on September 28, 1918, bringing 200,000 Philadelphians together. On October 1st, there were 635 new cases in Philadelphia, according to the University of Pennsylvania. The parade happened on September 28th, 1918. 3 days later, there were 635 new cases in Philadelphia. Philadelphia was one of the hardest hit U.S. cities. More than 12,000 people died in 6 weeks. More than 12,000 people died in 6 weeks, with about 47,000 reported cases, according to the University of Pennsylvania. By the 6-month mark, about 16,000 people had died, and there were more than 500,000 cases. The parade is not all to blame. The parade is not all to blame, however. Other factors contributed to the flu spread, including high population and poor working and living conditions. Still, it is an example of what not to do during a pandemic, according to the Center for Disease Control's Division of Global Migration and Quarantine. St. Louis, for example, canceled its parade while Philadelphia did not. So St. Louis, so when you study this, you see that different cities handled it differently. It was less severe in St. Louis. St. Louis had a parade scheduled. St. Louis canceled their parade. Philadelphia did not cancel their parade. In the end, the death toll in St. Louis did not rise above 700, according to the CDC. Quote, this deadly example shows the benefit of canceling mass gatherings and employing social distancing measures during pandemics, the CDC said. In the US, about 675,000 people died of the 22 million people who caught the flu in the US. 22 million people in the US caught the flu in 1918, the Spanish flu. 675,000 died from it. So as more and more U.S. cities cancel their St. Patrick's Day parades or other events, it may be useful to look to Philadelphia in 1918. If this even shows us anything, it's that these cancellations can save lives. So as historians, we look to the past to see, how did we deal with situations similar to this? What can we learn from it? How do we not make the same mistakes? What can we learn from this, and how can we use this to deal with the problems of the day? You hear me talk about how a people's history and culture teaches them how to deal with the problems of the past in the present and the future to meet the needs of the community. Okay? This is one of the reasons why we study history. When it comes to African history, we understand that it's African history and culture gives us our foundation. It gives us our values, our interests, and our principles. And this impacts our self-esteem, our self-development, our self-worth. It's our values, our interests, and our principles that influences our economic empowerment and our political empowerment. So read this article from CNN.com. Philadelphia did not cancel a parade during a 1918 pandemic. The results were devastating. Okay, let me give you this link here. Let's go back to the one from the Washington Post. How's everybody doing on Facebook? Follow us on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network. Also follow us on our YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP on YouTube. Turn on the live notifications so we know when we go, so you know when we go live. African American business owners supposed to name your business here on the thread of the broadcast. We'll let you know how you can advertise with the African History Network. Our current promotion is buy 1 month, get 2 months free. We know a lot of businesses have had to shut down maybe brick and mortar operations and are looking for a way to advertise, reach thousands of people across the country every week. Email us at customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com. How you doing, Pamela in Metro Detroit? How you doing, Cliff Martin? Those watching us on Facebook. Who else we have here? Audrey, Denise, Kevin. Just a few of the people watching us on Facebook, on YouTube. We've got Ale, we've got Noi, Motivation, Move Forward, Modise in Johannesburg, South Africa. How you doing down there, Modise? Margaret V. Font, T. Lynn, VC, DB Cooper, just a few people watching us on YouTube. Team Mashian on YouTube also, okay? And then we're also broadcasting on Twitter, on Periscope, the AHN show on Periscope, okay? All right, how you doing, Tanja? Also, you can donate to the African History Network, paypal.me/the AHN show, or $ the AHN show through Cash App, $ the AHN show through Cash App, or paypal.me/the AHN show as well. It helps us keep doing what we're doing. And you can order my DVD lectures at our website. And we have a lot of them on digital download also. I'm putting more on digital download as well. At our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. All right, let's continue here. So we see that what happens when you have the government suppressing information, the people suffer from this. This is what happened in 1918. Okay, so let's go back to the one from the Washington Post. Trump is ignoring the lessons of 1918 flu pandemic that killed millions, historians say. All right, now, is this the right one? Okay, yeah, this is the right one here. Let's continue here. So we see that September 27th, 1918, the Jefferson County Union in Wisconsin warned about the seriousness of the flu pandemic. Within days, an Army general began prosecution against the paper under a Wartime Sedition Act, claiming it had depressed morale. So as the pandemic raged through October of 2018, Americans could see with their own eyes that the absurd reassurances coming from local and national officials were not true. I guess like people saying, oh, it's just going to go away when the weather gets warmer. Oh, it's being contained. Oh, no, we're containing it. As Kellyanne Conway said, Miss Alternate Facts, oh, no, it's being contained. The experts are saying, no, it's not being contained. We have to get ahead of it. Now we're past the containment point. Now we're focused on mitigation, trying to mitigate it and spread and slow down the spread of it. The crisis of credibility led to wild rumors about bogus cures and unnecessary precautions. So you mean like the conspiracy theories floating around and a lot of these bogus cures being promoted? The history is repeating itself. The Spanish flu ultimately killed about 50 million people worldwide, including 675,000 people in the United States, according to the CDC. Even President Woodrow Wilson called it in the middle of negotiations to end World War I. John Barry said, quote, I think the number one reason, the number one lesson that came out of the experience is that is that if you want to prevent panic, you tell the truth. If you want to prevent panic, you tell the truth. In 2005 and 2006, author John Barry contributed as a subject matter expert to an influenza pandemic plan created by the CDC. He said he felt it was his job to beat the, quote, tell the truth drum. Now with coronavirus, John Barry says he's a little bit worried. Now this article is from February 27th. What was this article from? What date was this? Hold on. What date was this? He says he's a little bit worried. A lot of people are. Stock market's worried also. This is from February 29th. Okay. February 29th, 2020, because we know this year is a leap year. So he said he's a little bit worried. Now with the coronavirus, Barry said he's a little bit worried about the plan being followed. He does not think the Trump administration is, quote, outright lying, but they're definitely giving you interpretations that seem to be the best case scenarios, end quote. Now, Dr. Anthony Fauci is giving you the worst case scenario. And we know that there was a congressional doctor who's given the worst case scenario. We know that Dr. Anthony Fauci on Meet the Press on Sunday, he said that Americans are going to have to hunker down significantly more to fight coronavirus, and asked whether the U.S. should consider a 14-day national shutdown similar to those in Europe. Dr. Anthony Fauci said, quote, "I would prefer as much as we possibly could. I think we should really be overly aggressive and get criticized for overreacting." Okay. We know that, see, Axios.com has an article from, I think this is about March 13th, March 14th. Congressional doctor expects 70 million to 150 million U.S. coronavirus cases. The Congress in-house doctor told Capitol Hill staffers at a closed-door meeting last week that he expects 70 million to 150 million people in the U.S., roughly a third of the country, to contract the coronavirus. Two sources briefed on the meeting told Axios, okay, Axios, Axios.com. The estimate, which is in line with other predictions from health experts, underscores the potential seriousness of this outbreak, even as the White House has been downplaying its severity in an attempt to keep public panic at bay. Dr. Brian Monahan, the attending physician of the U.S. Congress, told U.S. Senate chiefs of staff, staff directors, administrative managers, and chief clerks from both parties that they should prepare for the worst and offered advice on how to remain healthy. Forecasting the spread of a virus is difficult, and the range of realistic possibilities is wide. But other estimates, including statistical modeling from Harvard epidemiologist Mark Lipsitch, Lipsitch, have said that somewhere between 20% and 60% of adults worldwide might catch the virus. Check this out from Axios.com. Congressional doctor expects 70 million to 150 million U.S. coronavirus cases. I hope they don't go to work sick. Because just a couple of weeks ago, Donald Trump told Sean Hannity it's all right to go to work sick. NBCnews.com, read the article, Trump has many hunches about the coronavirus. Here's what the experts say. Because Donald Trump told Sean Hannity, in a Fox News interview, Trump suggested that people infected with the virus could still go to work and make full recoveries. This is in direct contrast with what the Center for Disease Control has advised people. Trump said if we have thousands or hundreds of thousands of people that get better just by, sitting around and even going to work, some of them go to work, but they get better. The Center for Disease Control has said people displaying symptoms should stay home and self-quarantine unless they are seeking medical care. The CDC on their website at the time of this article said, quote, people who are mildly ill with COVID-19 are able to isolate at home during their illness. You should restrict activities outside your home, except for getting medical care. Do not go to work. The Center for Disease Control is telling you don't go to work with COVID-19. Donald Trump said on Sean Hannity's show on Fox News, it's all right to go to work. Now, if you know anything about Fox News viewers, well, I don't want to say they're dumb, but the median age of Fox News viewers is about 65 years old, meaning that 50% of the viewers are older than 65, 50% are younger than 65. 60 and older, this has a higher mortality rate. Mortality rate is about 15% for those who catch it 60 years old or older. The age of the average of the median age of the Fox viewer is a vulnerable age for this virus to have a severe impact on them or be deadly. The CDC says do not go to work, do not go to school or public areas if you have COVID-19. Avoid using public transportation. Avoid ride sharing like Uber and Lyft. Avoid taking taxis. This is what the CDC says on their website. Donald Trump told Sean Hannity something else. Trump later denied saying that people could go to work ill, even though that's what he said in the quote. Okay. All right. So let me give you the link here to this article from the Washington Post. Trump is ignoring the lessons of 1918 flu pandemic that killed millions, historians say. Check out this article. This is written by Gillian Brockhale. Very, very good article. I've read a number of articles dealing with 1918 flu pandemic. Okay. So we had Tanja, Pamela, Michael Williams in Kalamazoo, Michigan. How you doing? African-American business owners, email us at customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com. We'll let you know how you can advertise with the African History Network. We have a few new advertisers here. SageandElmApothecary.com. SageandElmApothecary.com. They make over 60 different products, beautiful handcrafted soaps, natural toothpaste, hydrating oils, deodorant, face masks, shampoos, conditioners, and so much more. They create unique products, especially with you in mind. They use simple ingredients such as whole fruits, herbs, and vegetables. Each product crafted offers a unique plant-based experience. Visit their website, sageandelmapothecary.com, APOTHECARY. You can order their products, but also find out about their pop-up shops and vending events that they participate in throughout the year. Use promo code AHN Spring 20, AHN Spring 20 to get a 20% discount. Okay. SageandElmApothecary.com. Now, because people are at home, some people are at home more. They are looking for something to read. And the book by DeKalb Walcott Jr., Black Heroes of Fire. Black Heroes of Fire is a book that you can definitely read while you're at home, even if you're self-quarantining. Black Heroes of Fire introduces and describes the background of the members of Engine Number 21, which was Chicago's first organized, paid African-American firefighting company. Chicago's first organized, paid African-American firefighting company. Find out about the heroism of Engine Number 21, the history of the first African-American firefighting company in the company in Chicago in the book Black Heroes of Fire. Black Heroes of Fire. It's available right now at Amazon.com as well as BlackHeroesOfFire.com. BlackHeroesOfFire.com. Now, for those who are traveling by car, some people are still flying. Okay, more power to you if you're gonna fly. But fly in style if you're gonna fly. Hopefully you ain't flying internationally. Okay, if I got to go somewhere out of town, I'm driving. Okay, but you can carry your culture with you when you travel, however you travel. Car, carpool, Greyhound bus. Okay, BlackLionLeather.com is offers unique travel accessory. It offers unique travel accessories. They manufacture and sell online to the culturally inspired African-American traveler. They have leather accessories there. They are 100% African-American owned. Their tagline is, their motto is carry your culture, carry your culture. Visit their website, BlackLionLeather.com, BlackLionLeather.com, and carry your culture wherever you go. Okay. You can use leather accessories to go to work too. Some people are still going to work. All right. Okay. So let's look at this. I want to look at this last article here. I think this is the last one. This is from March 3rd, 2020, history.com. Also, history.com has an article from March 16th, 2020. How U.S. cities tried to halt the spread of the 1918 Spanish flu. Okay. How U.S. cities tried to halt the spread of the 1918 Spanish flu. And this dealt with the different approaches from different cities. They talk about Philadelphia holds the parade. St. Louis flattened the infection curve. The public health response in St. Louis could not have been more different than the one from Philadelphia. Even before the first case of Spanish flu had been reported in the city, Health Commissioner Dr. Max Starkloff, Starkloff, had local physicians on high alert and wrote an editorial in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch about the importance of avoiding crowds, When a flu outbreak at a nearby military barracks first spread into the St. Louis civilian population, Dr. Max Starkloff wasted no time closing the schools, shuttering movie theaters and pool halls, and banning all public gatherings. There was pushback from business owners, but Dr. Max Starkloff and the mayor held their ground. When infections swelled at or increased as expected, thousands of sick residents were treated at home by a network of volunteer nurses. Now, that was because of these precautions. St. Louis public health officials were able to flatten the curve and keep the flu epidemic from exploding overnight as it did in Philadelphia. Philadelphia did not cancel that parade, that 1918 parade, okay? San Francisco enforced wearing masks. In San Francisco, health officials put their full faith behind gauze masks. The gauze mask really didn't work. California governor at the time, William Stephens, declared that it was the, quote, patriotic duty of every American citizen, end quote, to wear a mask, and San Francisco eventually made it the law. Citizens caught in public without a mask or wearing it improperly were arrested, charged with disturbing the peace, and fined $5. Now, the gauze masks city officials claimed were 99% proof against influenza were in reality hardly effective at all. San Francisco's relatively low infection rates in October 1918 were probably due to well-organized campaigns to quarantine all naval installations before the flu arrived, plus early efforts to close schools, ban social gatherings, and close all places of public amusement. On November 21st, 1918, a whistle blast signaled that San Francisco could finally take off their masks, and the San Francisco Chronicle newspaper described sidewalks and runnels strewn with the relics of a torturous month. But San Francisco's luck ran out when the third wave of the Spanish flu struck in January of 1919, believing masks were what saved them the first time. Businesses and theater owners fought back against public gathering orders. As a result, San Francisco ended up suffering some of the highest death rates from Spanish flu nationwide. So they believed that it was the mask that saved them. So then they started having public gatherings, and then, again, and the mask is not what saved them. It was shutting down the public gatherings, closing the pool halls and things like this. That's what saved them. So as a result, San Francisco ended up suffering some of the highest death rates from the Spanish flu pandemic nationwide. The 2007 analysis found that if San Francisco had kept all of its anti-flu protections in place through the spring of 1919, it could have reduced deaths by 90%. So when we go back in history, we see that different cities took different approaches to this flu pandemic. St. Louis had a much better approach than San Francisco and Philadelphia. So read this article also. This is from March 16th, 2020. No, this one here is from March 11th, 2020, updated March 16th, 2020. This is how U.S. cities tried to halt the spread of the 1918 Spanish flu. How U.S. cities tried to halt the spread of the 1918 Spanish flu. This is from history.com. History.com is the official website of the History Channel. Okay. How you doing, Denise? Watching us on Facebook. So everybody share this broadcast on your social media platforms and invite your friends to tune in. You're not going to hear a lot of this type of information in other places. Okay. You notice the type of information I deal with, a lot of this superfluous nonsense that may be popular, I don't deal with. Okay. And I created the African History Network to focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now it's correct wrong behavior. So those of you who've been following me for a number of years, you know this, especially if you go back to when I was broadcasting on Blog Talk Radio. These broadcasts are in audio podcast format. So if you go to AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, right on the homepage, click on listen to podcasts. We have about 1,000 podcasts going back to 2010. So we'll put a lot of these in audio podcast format. And then when you advertise with us, also African-American business owners, we take your 30-second and 60-second commercial, we put it into the audio podcast of our various broadcasts also, and our Sunday night show. Okay. All right, Lawrence, thanks for the donation. Okay, let's continue here. So we see different approaches taken by different cities. Lastly, if we look at history.com, and I think I'll give you all these articles because I have a bunch of them here. Trying not to overwhelm you because this is just a fraction of the articles I have dealing with coronavirus. And then I want to wrap up with some information from the CDC, some background information on coronavirus from the CDC. This is a very fluid story. It's a lot of information coming very quickly. So this is why I can't do as many broadcasts as I want to do because I'm constantly doing research. Let's see what, okay. Why was the second wave of the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic so deadly? The first strain of the Spanish flu was not particularly deadly. Then it came back in the fall with a vengeance. So what happened? So while the global pandemic lasted 2 years, the vast majority of deaths were packed into 3 especially cruel months in the fall of 1918. Historians now believe that the fatal severity of the Spanish flu's second wave was caused by a mutated virus spread by wartime troop movements. A mutated virus spread by wartime troop movements. When the Spanish flu first appeared in early March 1918, it had all the hallmarks of a seasonal flu, albeit a highly contagious and virulent strain. One of the first registered cases was that of Albert Gitchell, Gitchell, who was a U.S. Army cook at Camp Funston, Funston, in Kansas. He was hospitalized with a 104-degree fever. The virus spread quickly throughout the Army installation, which was home to 54,000 troops. By the end of the month, 1,100 troops had been hospitalized and 38 had died after developing pneumonia. So we saw that the virus killed young, old, and in between. From September through November of 1918, the death rate from the Spanish flu skyrocketed. In the U.S. states alone, 195,000 Americans died from the Spanish flu in just the month of October. And unlike a normal seasonal flu, which mostly claims victims among the very young and very old, The second wave of the Spanish flu exhibited what's called a W curve, high numbers of deaths among the young and old, but also a huge spike in the middle, composed of otherwise healthy 25 to 35-year-olds in the prime of their life. So this second wave really targeted those 25 to 35 years old. Now that really freaked out the medical establishment, that there was this atypical spike in the middle. Not only was it shocking that healthy young men and women were dying by the millions worldwide, but it was also how they were dying. Struck with blistering fevers, nasal hemorrhaging, and pneumonia, the patients would drown in their own fluid-filled lungs. Only decades later was scientists able to explain the phenomenon known as cytokine explosion. Cytokine explosion, I think it's pronounced, or cytokine explosion, CYTOKINE. This occurs when the human body is being attacked by a virus. The immune system sends messenger proteins called cytokines to promote healthy inflammation. But some strains of the flu, particularly the H1N1 strain responsible for the Spanish flu outbreak, can trigger a dangerous immune overreaction in healthy individuals. In those cases, the body is overloaded with cytokines, leading to severe inflammation and the fatal buildup of fluid in the lungs. British military doctors conducting autopsies of soldiers killed by this second wave of the Spanish flu described the heavy damage to the lungs as akin to the effects of chemical warfare. British military doctors conducting autopsies on soldiers killed by this second wave of the Spanish flu described the heavy damage to the lungs as akin to the effects of chemical warfare. So there was a lack of quarantines at this time that allowed the flu to spread and grow. So it's believed that the rapid spread of the Spanish flu in the fall of 1918 was at least partly to blame on public health officials unwilling to impose quarantines during wartime. In Britain, for example, a government official named Arthur Newsholme, Newsholme, knew full well that a strict civilian lockdown was the best way to fight the spread of the highly contagious disease. But he would not risk crippling the war effort by keeping munitions factory workers and other civilians home. According to research, Newsholme concluded that, quote, the relentless needs of warfare justified incurring the risk of spreading infection, and encouraged Britons to simply carry on during the pandemic. The public health response to the crisis in the United States was further hampered by a severe nursing shortage, as thousands of nurses have been deployed to military camps and the front lines. The shortage was worsened by the American Red Cross's refusal to use trained African-American nurses until the worst of the pandemic had already passed. The shortage of nurses was worsened by the American Red Cross's refusal to use trained African-American nurses until the worst of the pandemic had already passed. And there's an article from history.com that deals with this, when Black nurses were relegated to care for German POWs. This is from June 26, 2018. Before President Truman desegregated the U.S. military on June 26 in 1948, Black nurses had fewer and less desirable opportunities in the U.S. Army Nurse Corps. On July 26, 1948, so this is after World War I ends. World War I ends 1945. President Harry Truman signed an executive order that desegregated the U.S. armed forces. The act was long overdue, particularly for African-American nurses who had just served in World War II. Though the United States had been at war against Hitler's racist regime, Jim Crow segregation permeated American culture and the entire military, including the U.S. Army Nurse Corps. African-American nurses who served in the war found themselves in one of two places: segregated bases with Black soldiers or German prisoner war camps. Because African-American nurses were used to tend to German POWs. At the segregated bases, African-American nurses served in all Black units. They served in all Black units. They lived in colored barracks, worked in colored hospitals, ate in separate dining areas, and socialized in segregated spaces on base. Along with the separate facilities, Black nurses endured racist treatment from local white residents in town, fellow white Army officers, and even from German prisoners of war. During World War II, there were 371,683 German POWs who were captured in Europe and Northern Africa. Okay, during World War II, there were 371,683 German POWs who were captured in Europe and Northern Africa, then shipped to the United States and detained in more than 600 camps across the country. Prisoners of war under rules set by the Geneva Convention could be made to work for the detaining power. And with millions of American men away serving in the military, there was a significant labor shortage in the United States. Farms, canneries, plants, and factories, plants, and other industries needed German POWs as workers. And African-American Army nurses were overwhelmingly assigned to POW camps. To them, the assignment could be deeply troubling. African-American nurses volunteered to serve wounded American soldiers, not the enemy. African-American nurses volunteered to serve wounded American soldiers, not the enemy. It had taken decades for African-American nurses to be admitted into the U.S. Army Nurse Corps and to be given the task of caring for soldiers in Hitler's army felt like a betrayal. Read the rest of this article here. This is from history.com. When Black nurses were relegated to care for German POWs. This is during World War II. Okay, so check out this article here. Let's go back to understanding why the second wave of the 1918 flu pandemic was so deadly. Okay, so the public health response to the crisis in the United States was further hampered by a severe nursing shortage, as thousands of nurses have been deployed to military camps and the front lines. The shortage was worsened by the American Red Cross's refusal to use trained African-American nurses until the worst of the Spanish flu pandemic had already passed. Now, one of the chief reasons that the Spanish flu claimed so many lives in 1918 was that science simply did not have the tools to develop a vaccine for the virus. Microscopes at the time could not even see something as incredibly small as a virus until the 1930s. Instead, top medical professionals in 1918 were convinced that the flu was caused by a bacterium nicknamed Pfeiffer's bacillus, Bacillus. After a global flu outbreak in 1890, After a global flu outbreak in 1890, a German physician named Richard Pfeiffer found that all of his infected patients carried a particular strain of the bacteria he called influenza. When the Spanish flu pandemic hit, scientists were intent on finding a cure for Pfeiffer's bacillus. Millions of dollars were invested in state-of-the-art labs to develop techniques for testing for and treating H. influenza, all of it for naught. This was a huge distraction for medical science. By December 1918, the deadly second wave of the Spanish flu had finally passed, but the pandemic war was far from over. A third wave erupted in Australia in January 1919 and eventually worked its way back to Europe and back to the United States. It's believed that President Woodrow Wilson contracted the Spanish flu during the World War I peace negotiations in Paris in April of 1919. So everybody share this broadcast on your social media platforms, okay? Do me a favor, share this broadcast if you like this type of information. Click on the thumbs up or click on the like button as well. Now, the mortality rate of the third wave was just as high as the second wave, but the end of the war in 1918 removed the conditions that allowed the disease to spread so far and so quickly. Okay, the end of the war in November 1918 removed the conditions that allowed the disease to spread so far and so quickly. Global deaths from the third wave, while still in the millions, paled in comparison to the apocalyptic losses during the second wave. So check out this article as well. This is from history.com. Why the second wave of the 1918 Spanish flu was so deadly. Okay, and this is from March 3rd, 2020, from March 3rd, 2020. Okay, also be sure to sign up for our email newsletter. Text the word Kemet, K-E-M-E-T, 22828. Text the word Kemet, K-E-M-E-T, to 22828 to sign up for our email newsletter. Okay, lastly, I want to look at some updated information from the CDC, Center for Disease Control and Prevention. This information was updated March 15th, 2020. March 15th, 2020. It gives some background information on COVID-19. COVID-19 is the disease caused by the coronavirus. So the Center for Disease Control and Prevention is responding to an outbreak of respiratory disease caused by a novel or new coronavirus that was first detected in China and which has now been detected in more than 100 locations internationally, including the United States. The virus has been named SARS-CoV-2, SARS-CoV-2, and the disease it causes has been named coronavirus disease 19, which is abbreviated COVID-19, COVID, COVID-19. So the disease it causes, okay, so the name of the virus is SARS-CoV-2, okay? Severe acute respiratory syndrome. SARS-CoV-2 is the name of the virus. The disease that the virus causes is called coronavirus disease 2019. It's abbreviated as COVID-19. It was basically discovered in December 2019 by doctors and scientists there in Wuhan, China, when people are coming in with these symptoms and they're seeing this new virus and they don't know what it is. On January 30th, 2020, the International Health Regulations Emergency Committee of the World Health Organization declared the outbreak a public health emergency of international concern. On January 31st, 2020, Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar declared a public health emergency for the United States to aid the nation's healthcare community in responding to COVID-19. On March 11th, 2020, the World Health Organization publicly characterized COVID-19 as a pandemic or global pandemic. You've heard me report on that. On March 13th, 2020, Friday the 13th, March 13th, 2020, Donald Trump declared COVID-19 outbreak a national emergency when just 2 weeks prior to that, at a rally, he referred to it as a Democratic hoax. When we look at the source and spread of the virus, coronaviruses are a large family of viruses that are common in people and many different species of animals, including camels, cats, and bats. Okay, so coronaviruses are not new. This strain of the coronavirus is what is new. Rarely, animal coronaviruses can infect people and then spread between people, such as MERS or SARS. Okay, so we remember MERS CoV. Okay, Middle East Respiratory Syndrome. Okay, remember MERS, and then remember SARS, Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome. Okay, these are all types of coronaviruses. Now the SARS-CoV-2 virus is a beta coronavirus, like MERS and SARS. All three of these viruses have their origins in bats. All three of these viruses have their origins in bats. So once again, SARS-CoV-2 is the actual virus that causes the disease known as COVID-19 or coronavirus disease 2019. Okay, it has its origins in bats. So all three of these viruses have their origins in bats. The sequence from US patients, the sequences from US patients are similar to the one that China initially posted, suggesting a likely single recent emergence of this virus from an animal reservoir. Early on, many of the patients at the epicenter of the outbreak in Wuhan, Hubei province in China, had some link to a large seafood and live animal market, suggesting animal-to-person spread. Animal-to-person spread. Later, a growing number of patients reportedly did not have exposure to animal markets, indicating person-to-person spread. Person-to-person spread was subsequently reported outside of Hubei, China, and in countries outside of China, including the United States. So it's believed that the virus mutated in humans. Once it went from animal to human, it's believed bats. Once it went from bat to human, however it went, it's believed that it mutated in humans so it could be spread from human to human. Person-to-person spread was subsequently reported outside of Hubei and in countries outside of China, including the United States. Some international destinations now have ongoing community spread with the virus that causes COVID-19, as do some parts of the United States. Community spread means being spread from human to human. And it's especially focuses on those people who did not travel internationally as well. Community spread means some people have been infected and it is not known how or where they became exposed. learn what is known about the spread of this newly emerged coronavirus. They have a link for that. Okay. So you can check out the rest of this here. This is at the CDC's website. They have some updated information. So you protect yourself. This is situation summary. This is under the tab, under cases and latest updates, situation summary on COVID-19 at the CDC's website, which is cdc.gov. Okay, so let's look at this here. I want to make sure I give you all the articles. There's a lot of research I do. I want to make sure I gave you all this. Okay, we got all that in. And mass gatherings, I gave you the information. NBCnews.com had the article from the CDC. Mass gatherings of 50 people or more should be canceled. And then also we saw the Dow drop 2,997 points on Monday, March 16th. It's going to be a bloodbath. The Dow fell 13% for its worst point loss ever. And Donald Trump, who just a few weeks ago was bragging about the stock market and look at your 401k. Okay. I told you he was a con man. Check that out also. All right, look, hey, we're going to have to get out of here. If you like this type of information, you can donate to the African History Network, $ the AHN Show through Cash App, $ the AHN Show through Cash App. Also, paypal.me/the AHN Show through PayPal, or at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Click on the yellow donate button. All my DVD lectures are available at our website. We have them on DVD, a lot of them on digital download also. If there are any that you want on digital download that are not available, let me know. Email me at customer service at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, customer service at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We also have my 15 DVD bundle pack, the Black History Month bundle pack. That's on sale $100. Regularly used like $200 and something. And then we have the Black Migration 1619 to 2019 6 DVD bundle pack. Black Migrations 1619 to 2019 6 DVD bundle pack. We also have that in digital download format as well. Okay, so that deals with 6 of my presentations from 2019, including 6 principles of political self-defense, understanding how laws and policies impact the economic conditions of African Americans. And Black Migrations was the 2019 annual theme for African American History Month, or Black History Month, okay? And that dealt with also the year of return. And Black Migrations dealt with not just the transatlantic slave trade, which was a forced migration, but also dealt with the Great Migration of 1915 to 1970, where you had 6 million African Americans migrating from the South up north. Okay, so you get a number of my presentations in that bundle pack, the Black Migrations 1619 to 1519 bundle pack. We have that on DVD and on digital download. I think DVD is $50. Digital download, I think, is $45, something like that. All right, so look, hey, we have to get out of here. Remember, at the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world. Because right now it's correct wrong behavior. What you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you and get away with is based upon what you think about yourself. Right now it's correct wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda forever. We'll talk to you next time. Peace.